Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. Well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Jennifer Hackett from Northwest Portal. Jennifer, I'm going to kind of set the stage what little I know, and then we're going to let you fill in the blanks, okay? So you've had an interesting career, but you've spent the last 20-some years in Ellensburg, and you went to Central and you took GIS. Is that correct?
So I got my resource management degree at Central, a master's, and while I was there, I got into GIS. I've always loved maps, and I did that as part of my coursework.
So Northwest Portal is this interesting mapping site that I'm not going to do justice to, but I want to know, we're just going to start off with this. What was your vision when you decided, did you wake up at 3 a.m. and go, I'm going to start a mapping site? Or what led us to where we are today?
So it evolved a bit. When I moved to Ellensburg, I had two small children. I'm not originally from Washington State. My husband is. We met overseas. We were both foreign service. And when I moved here, we're surrounded by great recreation, but it was really hard to find places to go and things to do. We have a lot of different agencies and organizations doing the recreation. There's a lot of recreation in this county that isn't even on maps. And I just wanted to know, where could I take my kids to the playground, to go for a hike, to go camping? And when I would try to find information, not having any local knowledge of Washington State, the information I needed wasn't there. I wanted to know, where can I go nearby that has an easy hike that doesn't require a pass at the trailhead? Where can we go camping that has a flush toilet, because my kids did not like porta potties, that has a playground, that has a boat launch or fishing for my husband? Those were the questions that I was asking, but the information was, well, here's the Forest Service website, here's the National Park website, here's the state parks, and there's DNR, and there's BLM, and there's the ports. And I just wanted to say, we want to go to this area, and what can we do? So a couple of years after I moved here, I had taken a couple of years off and was now looking to get back into the work world. My husband was retired, but I was too young to be retired, and my son was starting kindergarten. So I did the resource management program at Central Washington. And I love the program, but most of the jobs in resource management are government. And I spent 16 years working for the Defense Department. And I wasn't really that crazy about getting back into the government. And I love mapping. And I saw a lot of need. There was a lot of stories that could be told by maps, but mapping is expensive and it just wasn't getting told. So I started out working with local groups, fishery groups, chambers, even law firms doing mapping. And as I got into this, I realized that one of the big misses was, if you want to tell the story of recreation, so if you want to be able to answer the question, where can I go out to do X that has Y, you need to have everything in one place, and that just didn't exist. So there was a ton of data out there. There were also places not in the data, but the data was discombobulated. It was in different sources, even had different standards. One of the things I like to describe to explain this is, think of a horse camp. The Forest Service and the National Park Service both have horse camp as a category for their campground. But if you go to a national forest horse camp, it's a place that you drive your rig to, park your horse rig, and then you ride your horses from there. So a motorized truck, RV accessible campground that has facilities and horse trails nearby. If you go to a horse camp in the national park, it's something where you park your rig down the trail 10 miles and then you ride your horse in. So it's the same term, but it's a totally different experience. And so how do you gather all of this information, then fill in the blanks, and then be able to take that and tell a story? So I started working with the Kittitas County Chamber on some mapping projects and focused on Kittitas County. And then I decided I personally wanted to know more about the state. So I expanded it out to cover the entire state. And I've had the fortune to work with the Recreation and Conservation Office on a couple of projects. So they use our data for all of their analysis. or their big analysis. And so they needed the gaps filled in. So for example, if I pull in every city, county, agency, and nonprofit data set, I'm not going to get the parks in Adams County because Adams County doesn't have any data. The small cities don't have data to pull. And so working with RCO, we were able to go and do that scrub. What are we missing, and enhance the data. So we have information on about 20,000 recreation opportunities. So that's trails, trailheads, boat launches, recreation lands. And so we have the area that covers it, the routes, the roads, the trails. So put it all together, and then what do you do with it? And my original model had been that I would do maps or provide data to organizations that wanted the information. I like doing the data more than I like doing the sales, so I was never as successful at that as I'd like. Plus, a lot of people are used to free data, and even though you get what you pay for, it becomes a bit more challenging to get people to pay for quality data. And I do have some data clients, but I then started looking at how else can I get the information out? And that's where the Northwest Portal, which was originally called Washington Hometown, was born.
Okay.
And so the idea is using maps as a portal to tell stories. And so we have our own maps. We have an outdoors and off-roading. We have a food tourism one that was not as well maintained right now. We have a dog map, a boating map. So these all pull from the common data set to tell unique stories, a winter map. We had apps until the end of the year, but we decided that we simply didn't have the funding for those. Again, I'm not as interested in selling as I am in doing. And I kept hoping to find a partner who would be interested in working with me, and not finding that, I decided to focus on what I love instead of, trying to do what I didn't.
All right. You and I connected over something that just changed. And so I'd like to talk about that specifically, because this is gonna, to me, this is an interesting thing. So the Fairfax Bridge, recently, Washington State Department of Transportation has deemed it to be unsafe for foot traffic and or vehicles at this point in time. At the time that we're recording this, there is no update. This may be a permanent condition. We just don't know. But the minute that was announced, your map became inaccurate through no fault of yours, but It just, so how do you stay on top of changes like that happen? You have a massive data set. So how do you stay on top of the changes within the state of Washington?
So we do it a couple of different ways. So in the case of the Fairfax Bridge, I'm on a number of Facebook groups, which, even though a lot of people kind of poo-poo Facebook, a lot of people talk there.
Yes.
And also a lot of agencies and whatnot. And so I saw the announcements in the Evans Creek motorized group and the DNR pages about the bridge closure. And incidentally, my maps are now accurate. As of yesterday, the bridge is marked as closed. The trailheads and trails that are only accessible from the bridge are marked as closed. And there is a statement that says these are closed because the bridge is out and there is no alternate route, which is really important because a lot of people, particularly people who want to use Evans Creek, keep talking about detours. The problem is that the detour crosses private land. Mm-hmm. The landowner is willing to allow residents to cross their property so they can still access their homes, but they do not want the recreation travel to cross.
Okay.
And so a lot of people are very frustrated, but the fact is private landowner has reasons for not wanting this traffic. They've historically had problems with it. And so basically I'm constantly keeping my fellows. I'm on, Forest Service watch lists and whatnot. Our biggest closures are the fires in the summer. And so I keep up on those. I go to NCWeb and also because some fires don't show up on NCWeb, I'm constantly looking for information about new closures. And then when there's a fire, then I go and I say, okay, here's the fire. What agency's recreation land is covered in that fire area? And some of these can be really complicated because each agency only reports fire closures for their own land. And so particularly in the North Cascades, we've had fires that have touched National Park Service, National Forest, and DNR lands, and some fish and wildlife lands. All are closed. So if you want to know where you can go and what's closed in that area, you want to know that area. But we have now 4 different sites that each update information differently. So I'll go through, I'll say, these 4 different entities have land, and then I'll go to them, their pages, their information, find the closures and map them. And then I have a little field where I can explain why it's closed and where it's updated. And then I go back periodically. So if I have anything shown as a temporary closure, I go back every couple of weeks or every month and say, is it still closed? So for example, we still have a bunch of closures in the North Cascades National Park from last summer's fires. And so in May, at the beginning, or I've just done the one for May, but mid-May, I'll be going back in and saying, have they reopened these? Other closures we have a closure up in the Mount St. Helens area. The road to one of the sites was closed, and so I'm constantly tracking that. And they updated to say it's walk-in, so you can still get there. You have to walk in. I just did an interesting one. Have you ever been out to Damon Point in Ocean Shores?
Oh, wow. One time, a long time ago.
So this was a peninsula. If you went all the way down Ocean Shores, which is on the northern side of Grace Harbor, there was this absolutely amazing spit of land that went into the ocean. It was, narrow, but it was incredible. You could park. There was just a tiny little DNR parking area at the entrance with private land on both sides. One of my favorite places in the entire state. I never got to the end of the peninsula because the times we went, our kids were always young. Mm-hmm. And so one of us had to stay with the kids, and it always ended up being me. So my husband got to walk out to the end. But even just sitting on the peninsula, and we'd build sandcastles with my kids, well, that's washed out. In fact, DNR and the counties had to rescue people who walked out in low tide and then got trapped. Oh. And so, and DNR has posted this amazing video showing the channel, and it's a very active channel between that. So they're closing the parking lot because the beach on either side of the parking lot is private and you can't get to the point. So I just notated that as an update in my database this morning, and when I push out my May 1st updates, we'll get that changed. We also do seasonal updates. So there's a lot of things. There's campgrounds, roads, and trails that close on a regular sequence. Mm-hmm. And so if we know what that sequence is, we identify what months it's closed, and even down to the half month. So in the shoulder seasons, like things will open mid-April, mid-May. Mm-hmm. And so we can go out and basically do a bulk update and say, okay, if it's closed in March but not in April, then April 1st, I'll toggle the status from seasonal closure to open.
So let's I'll give you a specific example. So let's say, do you mark the North Cascades Highway as closed?
We don't, just because we're not currently doing highways. We could. Okay. But so that's one that we probably should do that, and we probably should do the Chinook Highway.
Chinook, okay.
But things coming off of that would, that are subject to a seasonal closure, we would do. But there's a lot of campgrounds and trails. We also do seasonal motorized closures. I just fixed that up because a lot of agencies, their data is a little bit weird. So I might have, you might have a block of trails that's all closed, and one trail that says on the website it has a seasonal closure and the other one doesn't. And so I realized as I was doing my switch for this month that I had these weird gaps where I would have a couple trails closed and open. So I actually called the Cle Elum Ranger Station. It was nice enough to get somebody. They're very understaffed right now and will be for the foreseeable future. But she identified that there's actually only a legal closure in one area. And then there are other trails that the Forest Service website says they're closed, but they're not really closed. It's just please, please, please don't go on them because until the ground is dry. And so those trails, we put in a comment that's, that said, please don't use until dry, because there's a difference between a legal closure and a please be nice. And then we do a major scrub every year for the winter trails. And for winter, we do snowmobile trails in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. Mm-hmm. And those ones, we have contracts with a couple of mapping companies for that data. So we go through every agency and work with the clubs in Oregon, and we do a major scrub on that on an annual basis. The stuff in Washington State, we try to update, but we're a very small organization, mostly me. And so we don't get to it all as often as we'd like. So we're kind of relying on heads ups. And if we don't get those, we may miss stuff.
Okay. I'm currently on your dog map. Mm-hmm. So I'm I literally just loaded the map up. It's zoomed out, just showing the state of Washington. Where is your data stored?
A little bit embarrassing, but I have a Access database that I keep wanting to transition to something sophisticated, but you know what? I can program Access. So I have an Access data. I've twice tried to convert it, and both times I had people say, oh, this is great, we can do it. And then it didn't work. The last guy's like, oh, I'm going to do all this thing and it's great. And then he wrote it SQL. I said, I have to be able to click, for options. I have to be able to change easily. And he built it without this. Well, you can just do SQL commands. And it's like, no. Yes, I could theoretically do it, but this is a huge database. Data management is the biggest piece. You didn't give me the core piece of it. So it's just a lot of, so it's an Access database. And then I don't know if you know anything about GIS, but there's shape files or the GIS component files. And so points, lines, and polygons that I work with ArcGIS. So what that lets me do is I can connect multiple. So I can map something as a trail and a line and an area sometimes something will have all three components to it.
Okay.
So I just have a database record, and I just have a unique identifier in the database that ties to those pieces. I can also produce, CSVs, Excel spreadsheets, KMLs, whatever you want. Data is data. And then I have a script that combines all of that, meshes it together, cleans it up, adds filters, because you'll see in the database there's a ton of filters. Like if you go to the dog map, you can say, I want a dog park that has a bathroom and a playground, or a park that has an off-leash area, and it'll pop up those.
Right.
And so I have a script that says, if this criteria is met, put this 2-character digraph in, and that's in the background. So we generate all of those. And then I use a company called Mapbox, which is a mapping program, which I like because if you put stuff on Google Maps like people do, you're stuck with Google Maps in the background and you're laying stuff on top. So polygons look messy. You're putting stuff over other stuff that's not right. The Google Maps does a horrible job with it, with recreation. And so with Mapbox, I can control everything. So I push the data up into Mapbox, and then I can tell different stories. So for example, in the dog map, you'll notice that I have a light green for recreation areas that don't allow dogs, because the national parks generally do not allow dogs, except in very specific circumstances, and most fish and wildlife areas don't allow dogs. On this map, I show all of the trails, but I color code the trails based on whether dogs are allowed, and I'm trying to think dogs are allowed or they're not allowed, and I'd like no one dogs on trail. And if I get my on leash off leash better, I might add a third color for that.
Okay.
So on this map dog parks are highlighted because that's an important story. Now if you go to my off-roading map,
all right, I'll go there.
The only trails that I show are trails that are open to motorcycles, ATVs, or ORVs. The trails are color-coded by those, and roads are color-coded by those specific categories. The filters are expanded for those activities and narrowed for other things so that you can really highlight and dig down what you've got. And so that you're telling that story of what you have. If you go to my summer map, the trails are coded by motorized or unmotorized, and of course closed trails, because to me on the summer map, I as a hiker would prefer to go on a trail where I'm not going to run into a motorcycle, ATV, or Jeep.
No, wait a second. I'm not seeing summer. I'm seeing outdoors, off-roading, Taste Northwest, winter sports, community, dogs, snowmobiling, and water sports.
Is that on the main page?
That's on the main page.
Because that, yeah. If you go to nwpmaps.com/adventure, or nwpmaps.com, and click on the web maps you can access in your browser, you'll see outdoors. And I have to fix that if my other page isn't working. So go to nwpmaps.com and then click on the Maps tab. Are you seeing that?
I am on the web maps.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm still not seeing the summer.
Oh, outdoors. I'm sorry.
Outdoors. Gotcha. Okay, now I'm seeing outdoors. Okay.
That's my mistake, yeah.
So I have a couple questions. I warned you this would bounce around a little bit.
Yeah.
But you've got this, number one, first question. Is Access still even supported by Microsoft?
Probably probably. Well, yes, sort of. I mean,
Okay.
so I have the offline version because I hate subscriptions.
Sure.
So not heavily supported, and eventually, it's either going to have to migrate or it's going to die, and I know that.
Okay. So I would, but here's the thing. Here's my takeaway. We seem, and I'm with you on the whole subscription thing, because you like the way Access is running right now, and then they, the vendor, no shade on Microsoft, but you like the software you're using, and then they put in some new feature that you're like, this just ruined it for me. I don't, my beef is with Adobe and
Esri is doing this. My ArcGIS software is dying, except I'll still be able to use it. They want me to go to their ArcGIS Online, which is not only subscription, but it's not 100% compatible.
Right.
And so I don't want to rebuild everything.
So about how big is your total database size?
So I have about 20,000 or 30,000 records. There's some of that I'll be able to clean up, places that are no longer open. It's got about 12 tables. So it's not an impossibly large set of data, but it's complex because because of a lot of the way that things relate. So for example, for a place, I have information about the location. I have information about how it's used. I have some tables that I had to split some of that data out because I maxed out the number of columns you could have in Access. And I have a lot of what Access calls multi-value fields. So for example, for amenities, does it have a bathroom, a picnic shelter, a picnic table,
right,
electric hookup, all of these different options that are trying to capture information across all of these different capabilities. And so I can go in and click those boxes, because if I had to have a separate field for each of those, it would become impossibly long. Right. And then I also link in, so I connect every single record in my database is tied to the original source. So I can say, I mapped this location based on information from WDFW's phishing data layer, so that I have that validity. Was this mapped by me off of Google? So not only can I credit back the data sources, which I think is really important, but I also can evaluate it. So if I have a trail and somebody says, well, is this trail legitimate? I can tell you why I mapped it.
Okay.
So it's not incredibly complex. I just have never had the budget to go. And at this point, I just turned 59. So I'm kind of looking at, I enjoy this. This is a passion project, but if I could find someone that was interested in taking it, I think it could be amazing. But I have decided that I do not want to spend my time trying to take it to the next level. So instead, I'm going to focus on what I love and hope that I can interest somebody in taking it over. But in the absence of that, this will work for the remainder of the time that I want to do it.
Okay. So your data then is overlaid on a Mapbox map.
Right. And what Mapbox does is Mapbox allows me to control, it's over and underlaid. Mapbox allows me to control every single piece of this. So unlike, for example, if you put something over a Google map, you're still going to have the lands, the roads, everything on that on Google. So on Mapbox, I can turn off the things that I'm mapping. So I don't want Mapbox to be using the OpenStreetMap public lands data because my data is better. But I can use Mapbox for things like roads and rivers that are correct. And I actually had to play a game. I actually have to overlay highway data because OpenStreetMap has a really weird way of classifying highways. So they basically classify highways as lanes. So there are roads that go through Seattle that they classify as major roads that appear way zoomed out. And there are mountain passes that are only one lane in each direction, like Chinook Pass, that you can't actually show in Mapbox until you zoom in, so you can't show both ends because the Mapbox editors say that that's not a major road. Yeah, it's one of the only 4 passes across the Cascades in Washington State. So anyhow, so kind of playing and tricking, but I can make this control, and then for each layer, so for each of my maps, I can control what it is. So like those different that I talked about the trails being mapped differently. So on the off-roading map, it's the same trails data set, but I say only show trails that have a motorized sport, and then these are the colors we're going to assign. And then on the outdoors map, I say only show trails that have summer activity, not the winter only trails, and these are the colors I want to assign. So it gives me this amazing level of control. I can have a single huge pool of data, and then I can direct it to each of these different pieces. And I can do custom maps. I'm working with WDFW, or not with WDFW, with Mid-Columbia Fisheries on a watchable wildlife map under a WDFW grant. And so that's an entirely another story that we're customizing the information. It will have a Spanish language, but it's all pulling off of this same common data.
Wow. We're lucky this is an audio only thing, because I just got way distracted on your map. I'm looking at the outdoors map, right? Okay. And I'm zoomed out. I'm zoomed out a little bit. I mean, I got most of the state of Washington here in front of me. Well, actually all of it, and a little bit of BC, little Idaho, little Oregon. And up near the top, east of Bellingham, there's a road that goes out there. And when I click on it, it doesn't tell me. I'm not clicking the right. So, it's the Mount Baker Scenic Byway. Okay. But there's this little red, it looks like the outline of a pepper. That's what caught my eye. Okay. It's just this little loop up near the Canadian border. And when I click on it, it's the, I got to zoom in. I started zooming in.
You're looking at the Copper Ridge Trail.
No, it was the Chilliwack Trail is what I was clicking on.
Okay.
And and so this is really interesting to me. So this trail remains closed between Chilliwack River cable car to the northern terminus due to hazards from falling dead trees and other ground hazards resulting from wildfires. And then it says it's in the North Cascades National Park in Whatcom County. The owner's NPS. It's an official trail. No dogs. Trail length 4.91 miles. Trail surface is natural. Sports, hiking, hiker trail. And then you got location contributed by the North Cascades National Park. That's a ton of data right there. And only reason I found it was because it looked like a pepper outline to me. So I was curious and I zoomed in. But then as I zoom in, I start seeing, the map just keeps going. I see all these trailheads and these camping sites. And then I zoom in on Boulder Creek Campground is closed. It does not say why it is closed. Seasons for summer. So it's out of season. Of season. But I guess what I'm trying to say is at first glance, it's a nice looking map of the state of Washington with a lot of data. But as I scroll in, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but I'm like very appreciative of the depth that you're going to. This is fascinating.
Right. And you actually, if you click on that little pink polygon to the side, you'll see, so North Cascades National Park has all of these zones for these cross-country zones, and several of them are still closed because of the fires.
Okay.
And that's what those red are. And that's one of the biggest challenges. You talk about kind of overwhelming. One of the biggest challenges with these maps, and I've played around with the design, is how to present the information without being overwhelming. Because if I have everything visible at the top level, it's completely worthless. So on that map, you see the regional trails and the public lands, and when you first start, and then as you zoom in, we show you the state parks, because that's kind of major, kind of some of the major forest or national park stuff. And then as you zoom in farther, you start getting more like, I show paved boat launches before I show primitive boat launches. But it's how do you layer stuff so that it's not so overwhelming that you lose the story? And I make sure, so now I have it set up so that places that are closed show up later than places that are open, so that if it's off season, you're not seeing the closed things up top. But it's a design thing to try to figure out how to be meaningful without being, how wide should the lines be? I've tried to pick the colors so that they are not overwhelming and they look nice, but they're comprehensible if you're colorblind. So I'm not perfect at that, but I try to work with different intensities and stuff. So really important pieces of information will look different. Will be distinguishable even if you have color blindness. But I like greens and reds. So how do you balance that out?
Well, no, this is what did I just see here? I'm having a squirrel moment. Oh, okay. So I saw this thing and the graphic was for a wine, a vineyard. And I was like, but I looked at it, and when I first zoomed in, I was like, what is that? And it's, it's grapes. This is really, so let me ask you this. So I'm zoomed in on kind of Waterville area. All right.
Okay.
And the plateau up there, lots of straight lines, a lot of, where are you getting like Road 8 Northwest and Road 6 Northwest and Road 3 Northwest?
So this area is in, give me just a second. So this area is in Douglas County. Douglas County allows WATVs on street legal roads or WATVs on county roads with a speed limit of 35 miles an hour or less. Mm-hmm. So I use the Douglas County Road Slayer and identified those roads that met the criteria. I don't map all county roads, but I've got forever, and we have over 10,000 miles of WATV roads mapped. So across the entire state of Washington, there's 10,000 miles of county roads that WATVs are allowed on. And WATVs are a special class, so those are the big ATVs. They have a green license plate. This is a state law that says counties can allow them if they choose on roads less than 35 miles an hour. And so this means that you can take your WATV and you can ride around. And some counties have a lot of them. Douglas and Spokane have a ton of places you can ride. Kittitas is a little tricky because we have WATV ordinance, but the road, so basically you have 50 mile an hour roads, and then you might have a 35 mile an hour county road. But the annoying thing is that before you get to the state roads where you can ride your WATVs, you have to cross Forest Service land, and the Forest Service does not consider WATVs to be street legal. So you can't ride it on that Forest Service piece. And so the connections get worse. And so in some places, these roads can be major riding opportunities, and in some places they're not significant. But every county, so I work with a UTV Adventures is a page for UTVers, and they came up with a list of all the cities and counties that had WATV ordinances, and then I work with their list. And then I read the rules in their list, which can be named roads. It can be roads, different counties have different definitions. And then I map based on that. And then we integrate that data into the maps. And as I said, we've come up with over 10,000 miles of those roads. And then I work with the people from the WATV Association are working to identify some loops that you can make, kind of highlight riding opportunities. And so we've worked with them to map out some of these loops that are just informally designated, but they're legal because they're all on approved roads.
I zoomed in on my house, which isn't on your map.
And if you toggle to air photo, you can see the air photo and you can actually see your house. So we allow you to toggle between the standard and on the air photo view. If you click on an area that's recreation lands, it'll actually still pop up and tell you the underlying recreation land, but it doesn't show it. The only polygons areas we show on the air photo view is we do have the closure areas in a semi-transparent so that you can see those.
Yeah, I'm looking because we live by the Sage Hills Trail,
and I don't have, you'll notice there's a new trail system, mountain bike trail system in Wenatchee, in the Wenatchee area. And I don't have those yet because I have not been able to get the data. I can get maps, but when I last tried to map it, it wasn't visible on the air photos yet. And I haven't been able to get anybody to give me the actual GIS data. And so I didn't have a way to map that, but I'm hoping to get those integrated. But the Sage Hill trails are they're a great example of the value of what we're doing, because people coming out to that area, they go to the Forest Service and they see the trails, but the best trail systems outside of Wenatchee are the Sage Hill Conservancy trails. And you would have to know to go to the Sage Hill site. But on our map, if you're just looking for where I can hike, you can see those opportunities. And we've worked with the Sage Hill Conservancy to make sure we're mapping the information correctly, that we have the right uses, and that we have the latest data.
This is fascinating. This is okay. Let's standpoint. Okay. So you said you used to have apps but you've decided just because of the
cost.
The cost. So how should people access your content? I mean, visit the website, in which we're going to leave a link to, obviously. But walk me through how you think the content is best served.
So you can access it through the website. We would like to work more, find more partners, because you can actually link to or embed our maps. And so let's say, for example, that you did a podcast about a location, an area.
Mm-hmm.
You could actually zoom into that area and even use our search features to do it by name. So if you search, you can search by name, you can zoom in, and then you can copy that URL and you could share that URL, and then people going to your page can see where it is. And we've got a little bit of this. We've got a Lines on Wines does this. We collaborate with them. So we add a link to all of the wineries that they talk about on their show. So when you click on the winery, you get it. And then they load the map with all of the places that they have shows that they've done podcasts for on that. I've been a little bit slow. I've been, last fall, I really said I'm putting too much effort into doing things I don't like. And I need to refocus and redefine what I'm doing. And so I've been working on that. That's when I made the difficult decision to drop the apps. We've started to do some GeoPDF maps. We did some for the winter, and we're working on summer ones. But I was doing blog posts, and I want to get back to that. So when I do a blog post, the blog post will have the text, and it'll actually have an embedded map with the places in the blog post, and then you can open the map full frame and navigate. The apps were fun, but like I said, I was spending all of the time I did sales, which I don't enjoy, just making enough money to cover the app hosting fees. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense.
So I am on Joyrides. And I'm on the Lopez Island one. Or Lopez, as it's kind of called. And you give a very brief history of it, because it would be the history of the San Juans, and Lopez would be a book by itself. And then you have this map that offers a ton of information. And are you saying, from a technical standpoint, all right, we're talking technical. So could I link to this map on Explore Washington State? You could, and you could create any map that you wanted and link to it on Explore Washington State. So you could highlight any area that you wanted. And let's say you're doing an article about a particular trail or a particular city, because every city is in there. Search for that term and then copy the URL, and you can embed it. And we've got instructions on our website. I need to clean that up a bit, but how to embed, and because we've got different ways to embed, to a version that has the legend on the side and a version that doesn't, so it's cleaner in a smaller space. But you can embed it, you can link to it, anything that we have on our maps. And we have a lot of filters built in, and we can add little filter cues to allow you. So the thing that allows me to highlight every single one of those locations with the looking glass is actually mentioned in the blog post. Right. And so we can embed that information if we're collaborating with you on the map. So we can add in tags that allow us to embed, and we can actually add links back to the podcast, which make it a richer experience. We've always seen, the reason we talk about this as a portal is we see this as basically as a collaboration. So like when I was talking about the WATVs, it's I found out about it and worked on it with the UTV Adventures. The WATV Association has helped me map it. The counties provide the data. So it's all these different layers of information, and that fascinates me. How you can tell a single story with all of these different pieces. And so we'd really like to do more collaborations where we're adding that. When I work with Lines on Wines, their links make our winery data richer. So when you click on a winery, you get a link to the podcast. That's a richer story. Right.
Our map makes their page richer because you can see, I want to do a wine tour. Well, I can listen to interviews with all these winemakers, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to do this driving loop. Well, here's all of the podcasts along my driving route.
Right. And that's kind of, this is very, there's a lot. I mean, this is kind of overwhelming, but for the sake of the podcast, I won't completely hijack the conversation.
And we like to highlight out stuff that's unusual and different. So in a lot of our blogs, I'm hoping to start doing a Hidden Washington, starting to do a series of short blog posts. I'm going to start with Union, Washington. I don't know if you're familiar with Union, but it's on the hook of the Hood Canal. So it's less than an hour from Olympia, just an hour from Tacoma. And it's this absolutely charming tiny little area, 2 beautiful state parks, but just a place where you can get out and recharge. There's a bar called Hood Canale that has live music and, wood-fired pizzas. But this idea that these are places that people don't know of or think of.
Right, which is right up our alley.
Right. Or I did a blog post a while ago. I did utility campgrounds. So places where you have campgrounds run by utilities. And this is something we were talking about in our pre-interview. I asked people, do you know who manages the northeasternmost campground in Washington State? So right on the Canadian border on the northern tip of Pend Oreille County. And, you didn't know it. I've only had one person I've ever asked that question to who knew the answer, because the answer is Seattle City Lights. And you say, why in the world does Seattle City Lights have a campground at the northern tip of Pend Oreille County? And it's the boundary campground and it's a boundary recreation area. The reason is that Seattle City Lights has dams on the Pend Oreille River. And any organization that has dams on a river, the dam is taking value from people. You're using a public resource. And so in exchange, as part of their licensing, every utility that has dams is required to offer mitigation. And a lot of that mitigation is recreation. And so you have all of these really amazing recreation resources around the state that are actually paid for by utility companies. And so this particular beautiful campground, bay, great big boat launch, wonderful day use area, spectacular picnic shelters, is Seattle City Lights part of their mitigation for the fact that they have dams on that river. But it's something that people just don't think about. Your area, Chelan, the Chelan PUD and the Douglas County PUD both have, or Grant County PUD, both have significant recreation resources in central Washington.
No, we do. And you're right.
And so those sorts of things that people don't really think about.
One thing I'm noticing, and I would encourage anyone that's listening to go to the website and take a look. These maps are really quite fast. They are not. I'm always worried about adding things like this to my sites because I'm concerned about page load. Mm-hmm. These are loading quickly.
Yeah. So the way that Mapbox work, it's called tiling, and so when I load up the data, it creates tiles for each zoom level. So it's not like a Google mashup where you have all of these individual points that are loading. It's actually loading. The data can be pre-done. Plus, if you go back and forth to the page, it's caching the data.
Mm-hmm. But it's even. Well, actually, I'm going to do this in real time. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to go to. Let's do this. Let's go here to web maps. I have not looked at the water sports one, so I'm going to click on that. Okay. And it's loaded, and it's staggeringly overwhelming with how much just popped up on my screen. Yeah. I am zooming out now. I was zoomed in probably. I got about 2/3 of the state. Now I've got the whole state here. There's no lag. There's no jittery. This is just smooth. Even
And occasionally with the bad connection, it'll take a minute to load the tiles.
Sure.
I mean that's inevitable. It also doesn't work. The reason we had the apps was because the apps allowed offline download. And that was the one big thing that you got from using the app. So like so that's why we're switching, and we're starting to do more GeoPDFs that you could use with events if you want. But more and more of the state has cell access, and I couldn't justify what I was spending for that.
Right. But I'm impressed from comparing it to like a Google map. This loads much quicker. No shade on Google here, but it's.
I'm happy to shade on Google.
All right. Well, I'm afraid they're listening, and my Chrome browser will fail me or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. They probably are listening, but
yeah. Well, yeah. So you've kind of said this is a passion project. You're not a big fan of sales. You're more of a I'm going to call you a data nerd.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you like if I called you up 2 years from now and I said, so Jennifer, how's things going? Did you meet your goal? What do you think? What would you like to see this do in 2 years?
So my dream would be to find the right people to work with, and in 2 years have the maps themselves actually be a project that businesses are being on, or communities are using. We'd like to work with more communities where we can create these custom interactive maps of their community and their businesses, so that more people are using it. And my vision had always been that businesses and communities could pay a small amount to be on the map or for custom maps. That would help cover the cost of doing the project. But it also helps connect. It would also help connect recreation and businesses. So a lot of times when I talk to people, they say, well, you just go to Google. But when people come over, so I live in Kittitas County, and the Teanaway Community Forest is a large block of what had been private forestry land that was sold to the state as part of the mitigation for salmon. And it's this amazing recreation area. But it's also land that's been taken out of the county's tax base. And although we get some mitigation money, we also have a ton of WDFW land, and WDFW does not pay the full amount that they're legally required to pay us for all of this land that's been taken out of our tax base, which is fine. I live in Kittitas County. I love it. But I used to be on the school board, and not getting taxes actually matters for keeping up our facilities. So the theory is that these are great recreation drivers, but if somebody from Seattle drives over to the Teanaway Community Forest, spends a wonderful day in Teanaway, and then drives back and has lunch in Issaquah or dinner in Issaquah, we as a county have borne the cost but not gotten the benefit. So if you can connect recreation and businesses, and people always say recreation is a driver of businesses, but if you're relying on people to go to Google, you're not getting that full connection. You're not telling people why they should come, drawing them into your community, and then getting them to connect with the businesses. And so that was the vision that I had, that this would be a powerful platform. I can't do it myself. And so, in 2 years, I'm hoping it's still up and running. We still have decent quality data. More people are using it. They're more aware of it. But my dream would be to find the right partner and be able to take this from something that's a passion project of mine to something that's really making a difference.
Okay. How many hours a week are you working on this?
So my main, what brings in the money is actually consulting work I do. I'm currently working on a big tourism project for a study for Grant County, working with a consultant, Beckwith Consulting. And it draws on my data and it makes the data richer. So for example, under this contract, I went up to Grant County and spent about 2 hours talking to WDFW up there, really going through the data, refining it, figuring out what was missing. It was all of the data came from WDFW originally, but some of the places really aren't valid, changing it all up, making it better. This will now go help tell the Grant County project. And so that's what's paying my bills right now. and I spend, it's not it's hard to say what you spend, because you probably know with yours, like when I bill for a client, if I screwed something up and I have to go back and redo it, I don't bill for that redo, and I screw things up a lot. Or there's I just need to think something through, so I go for a walk. So, what would have been an 8-hour day if I was working in an office and I got in and I left, is maybe 4 billable hours. I probably put in, maybe 20 to 40 hours a month on the Northwest Portal side. So working on blog posts, working on updates and corrections that aren't directly related. Obviously if I had funding, if we had people, we could do more. I've had my son works for me periodically, helping do updates. It'd be, I'd love to be able to be employing people to help keep the data updated. But again, I decided to cut back just because I was spending too much time trying to chase money and too little time doing what I love. So it's not, it's doable. The big project, I started working on this data set in 2010. So we're talking about 15 years to build it. Once you build it, then you're incrementally updating and improving it, as opposed to coming in from scratch.
So when you're not doing consulting work, when you're not putting hours in on the Northwest Portal, what do you like to do? Where do you like to go? So you've got the maps, you've got all the data. Where do you like to go?
So I like to explore. Whenever I go driving, I'll pull up my map and find interesting places to go. For example, in the Wenatchee area, there's this absolutely amazing wildlife area as you're coming into Chelan, and let me find the name for it because I always forget it. So it is the BB Springs Natural Area.
Okay.
So if you're coming up 97 and coming in the back, and so I was driving to Chelan and I was like, where can I stop? And I stopped up there. Well, BB Springs has these absolutely amazing metal sculptures, like and a great big, large pieces that tell the story of the native tribes that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that. Beautiful, beautiful trails, great picnic area, little fishing access spot. But I love to discover those things. When you drive out I-90 to Spokane, there's the Cheney wetlands. And so you wouldn't even know it was there. So it's a parking lot for the State Park Regional Trail. And you actually go through a fence that doesn't look like it's legitimate. And there's this wonderful trail system around this wetlands that I've stopped off at when I'm going. The wildlife area just north of Olympia is another one. Let me just see if I can remember what that was called.
Nisqually.
That I discovered off of that. So I have fun discovering those.
Mm-hmm.
I passionately love the ocean. I don't get out there as often as I'd like, just because it's too far.
But you just said earlier that you can get anywhere from Ellensburg.
Well, we can get anywhere from Ellensburg, but to get to the ocean is about 5 hours. So I can get there better than if I'm in Spokane, but I don't go. My husband doesn't really like to travel as much anymore, so it's mostly on my own. So I love getting out. I went out last summer. I made it all the way out to Neah Bay, which is the northernmost tip. Unfortunately, the day before the night I spent in Neah Bay was beautiful. The day I was there, it was pouring rain. And so I did get out and do a little bit of exploring. It was funny because I was on my own and it was midweek, late season. I called my son and I was like, okay, or messaged my son and I was like, okay, I am leaving from this location at this time. If I don't call you back in 2 hours, have Dad call the sheriff, because I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to explore. And there's this trail that you can take that takes you out to the very tip of Neah Bay.
Right.
But the place that we spend the most time, we have a cabin right off Lake Ketchelas, and that's actually a neat opportunity for people coming up from Seattle. So in summer, people drive down I-90. Ketchelas is the big lake that you drive along right after you go over Snoqualmie Pass. And people drive down it all the time. But the lake level drops in the summer, and you can actually walk down on the lake shore. And we've added some informal lake access points. So places that you can get, because the only official trailhead for the lake is at the north end of the lake. There's a boat launch, but a Forest Service boat launch, but it actually closes in the summer, because ATVers would use that to get onto the lake bed, and they were damaging the salmon salmon habit, or not salmon, bull trout. It's a big bull trout spawning area. And there's some state park parking areas up at that north end, but they're a long hike in. But there's a couple of spots. There's a Forest Service trail. There's a couple of spots where you can easily get to the lake. And there's actually 2 campgrounds along the lake, but it's so much fun to walk down onto the lake shore. And then it's like this giant private beach. Right. Also going up to Lost Lake, and there's a couple of trails that we really like to hike up there. So kind of lower key. You know, I used to go camping more with my family, but these days my ideal is to go up to the cabin where I can sleep in the bed and a bed, and then I can get out and enjoy things with, you know, I'm getting a little too old for a tent, although I do sometimes pack up a tent and go explore different areas.
My joke is, you know, my idea of camping is bad room service, but I'm trying to broaden my horizons a little bit.
And there's a ton of places on our maps. Actually, we have a filter for camping cabins. So if you want to find campgrounds that have camping cabins, you can click on that filter. It'll highlight every campground, every public campground in the state that offers a camping cabin.
And their 2-year waiting list.
What?
The 2-year waiting list to reserve them.
Unfortunately.
There's craziness there. Well, as we wrap this up, I always love to ask my guests some questions, but I'd like to ask you a couple different questions than I typically ask. They're going to be easy, I promise you. But Ellensburg. Well, one question I always ask, and I've warned you about this: coffee. So where's a great place? Where do you think is a great place in Ellensburg for coffee?
So there's 3 places the places that people know the most are D&M and Weinigers. And Weinigers is interesting. It was an old dairy that started doing ice cream as a way to sell their milk. Mm-hmm. And now they're not a dairy anymore. They're just an ice cream place. But my personal favorite is a place called Heyday Bacon Brew. It's across from the EV charging station on 3rd. And the reason I like it is that Weinigers and D&M, they get really busy. They're kind of noisy and loud. And Heyday's a little bit less known. And they have a nice downstairs area. They have a beautiful patio out back that has a little wall, and you can actually have your dogs. The dogs have to stay in the fenced area behind it.
Okay.
And then they have an upstairs sitting area. So they're more of kind of a quiet place that you have kind of this really great coffee shop vibe. They also make amazing cherry pie.
Okay.
And so that's probably that's my go-to.
That's your go-to? All
coffee place. I don't know if their coffee's any better, but when I go for the coffee place, I usually want to go and sit with friends and talk. Right. And so that's my go-to place for that. All
right. Yeah, because D&M is, great little coffee shop in right there in diagonal from the Davison building, but to me it's noisy. You're right. It's hard to have a conversation in there.
Yes. So Heyday is the place to go. If you think of a place you want to just go sit and sip a coffee, they've got good food, but I go there for the atmosphere. And for me, the atmosphere is not crowded. Is a big part of it.
So the follow-up question here is, it's about lunchtime. Where's a great place to grab lunch in Ellensburg these days?
So one of my favorite places is Red Pickle. It started out as a food, and because I love the guy who runs it. It started out as a food stand that was located near one of the breweries. And I used to get stuff there. I'm vegetarian, and as is my daughter, and in high school my son was. And I just loved the guy who ran it. He's this Guatemalan immigrant. He's the greatest character. He's so nice. He's super accommodating. My son was vegan for a while, and he actually made some adjustments so that my son is back to being a carnivore, but my daughter and I are still vegetarians. But I just loved him. It's unusual food. It's really charming. And they actually took over the old D&M location on Pine Street in the downtown area. And so they're a really popular gathering place. They have a big bar. They still cook out of the food truck, which they have out back. But I like that both for the food and for the character. I also like Bruce's Place, which is a bar restaurant attached to the pasta place. But that's another one like Heyday. I go there for the location. Don't like their inside at all. It's dark and noisy bar, which is fine. It's just not me. But they have a beautiful, very sheltered outdoor patio. And so if I'm getting together with friends in the summer and I want a place to sit and talk, that would be my lunch. One of those two would be my lunch place.
I think Red Pickle may be the single most recommended place, period, on this show. It's so funny to me. Almost every guest that's been on from Ellensburg has said the Red Pickle.
And they have good food.
They do. I've eaten there.
It is the character. More than the food, it's the character.
Yeah, no, it's it is as advertised. Let's just put it that way. The reason that so many of you are saying it is because it is as advertised. All right. This is the question I warned you about, and you agreed to play along. So, okay. And I already think I know your answer. All right. You ready? Cake or pie, and why?
That is a tricky one because you've got that Costco ultimate chocolate cake, but I love pies. I love fruit pies, but so I think I'd go.
If you had to only have one type, what would it be?
I think it would be pie.
Okay, but what type of pie?
Cherry pie, absolutely, with tart cherries. The best cherry pies in the world are made with tart cherries.
Okay. Yeah, you said pie when you were talking about the coffee shop, so I was like, I was thinking that. All right. Well, what didn't we talk about that we should have? I feel like, there's so much to go over here, and just like when I scroll in the maps, they keep layers of onion here. There's more and more. So I feel like we missed something. But what do you think we should have talked about that we might have overlooked?
So a big underlying in this story is resources for recreation. So the state mostly funds all of the state recreation, that's DNR, parks, and WDFW, out of the Discover Pass. Doesn't really, and it was, I was on a Facebook argument with somebody, and I said all of the funding comes from it. It's not all of it, but it's like 75%. I know the state has a budget crisis, but I wish we had more of a commitment, because all of the recreation agencies are under-resourced. The federal recreation agencies are going to really be hurting this year. We even did a project, and you can link from our webpage, where we actually show you what is federal, because I think a lot of people don't understand just how much of their recreation is federal. And no, these things aren't going to be closed, but you can't slash staff and not have an impact. Right. I know a lot of the agencies, so many of the resources are having to go to firefighting now. That's taking away from maintenance. Just that, you get what you pay for. And I think that we have to be aware that if we want nice things, we have to be willing to support them. And the Fairfax Bridge, and WashDOT has known that the bridge was in trouble, right. But it's a very expensive bridge that only serves a very small number of houses. Plus, it's the back entrance to trailheads to Mount Rainier and Evans Creek. And so it's a resource issue. WashDOT is also, they're trying to fix bridges that people are using to commute and to get into towns. There was a bridge that's out in Olympic National Park that closed off access to the Quinault rainforest. Normally, that's something that you would have gotten that would have been fixed with federal grants. Obviously, those don't happen right now. And the state was actually able to work with partners and do stuff to get that fixed. But we really need to be aware that you have to be able to keep and maintain these places, and we're loving them to death. The number of people out and using our recreation has exploded since COVID, which is wonderful. But not only did the resources not increase, they've now been cut.
So I'm going to encourage everybody, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes, but go check out northwestportal.com and look at the maps. Learn some new places to go and get outdoors in Washington State. I will tell you that I stumbled across the wine podcast off of your site and have been listening to a few episodes of it. So kudos to another Ellensburg person who's doing
right.
more.
And that passion project,
yeah.
A former professor at Central.
But I do think it's very interesting how you've partnered up there with the episodes that have conversations about wine vineyard, and then you put them on the map, and vice versa. I think that's really cool, and I'm going to be spending some more time on your site. So I really appreciate you sitting down with me today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.